up to half of all patients on long-term oral glucocorticoid therapy will experience a bone fracture at some point in their lives. We are talking about a massive portion of a specific patient population navigating a medical tightrope every single day. Today, we are unpacking the realities of aging with adrenal insufficiency, a condition where the body cannot produce its own stress hormones. A recent article from My Adrenal Life highlighted this complex intersection of natural aging and a static endocrine system. Rachel, we tend to think of aging as a universal biological decline, but for someone with adrenal insufficiency, the baseline rules of biology seem to operate under a different framework.
The fundamental difference lies in the loss of biological adaptability. In a typical endocrine system, your body acts like an automatic transmission. If you encounter physical stress, emotional stress, or even just a strenuous workout, your adrenal glands pump out cortisol in real time to meet that exact demand. As you age, other hormones like estrogen, testosterone, and growth hormone decline. A healthy body compensates by adjusting that cortisol rhythm. For someone with adrenal insufficiency, whether primary, like Addison's disease, or secondary, that automatic transmission is broken. Patients rely on fixed, manual doses of oral cortisol replacement. When you combine natural, age-related hormone decline with a static, inflexible cortisol supply, you get a compounding effect that changes how the body recovers and maintains itself.
Let us look at the history of how we treat this condition. Before the mid-20th century, a diagnosis of primary adrenal insufficiency was a fatal sentence. Once synthetic cortisone was developed, the disease became a manageable chronic illness. Because the initial medical victory was keeping people alive, the long-term consequences of decades of synthetic hormone replacement were pushed to the background for a long time.
Medical science focused on survival first. The standard protocol became replacing the missing cortisol with hydrocortisone or prednisone. In primary adrenal insufficiency, patients also lose aldosterone, which regulates sodium, and DHEA, an androgen precursor. For decades, the goal was avoiding an acute adrenal crisis, a life-threatening state of low cortisol. Now that patients are living full lifespans, endocrinologists are observing the long-term effects of that treatment. The Endotex database from the National Institutes of Health categorizes glucocorticoid-induced osteoporosis as the most common iatrogenic, or medically induced, cause of secondary osteoporosis. The synthetic hormones keeping patients alive also interfere with bone remodeling over a period of decades.
That creates a paradox for the patient. The medication is life-sustaining, yet it contributes to structural physical decline over time. I want to challenge the mechanics of that bone loss. Is the osteoporosis a result of the medication itself, or is it the lack of other supporting hormones that adrenal insufficiency patients are missing?
Both factors are at play, which is why the My Adrenal Life piece refers to a stacking effect. Glucocorticoids inhibit the formation of new bone cells, called osteoblasts, and extend the lifespan of cells that break down bone, called osteoclasts. If a patient is even a bit over-replaced, meaning their regular dose exceeds their physiological need, that bone breakdown accelerates. At the same time, patients with primary adrenal insufficiency have a near-total loss of DHEA. DHEA is vital for maintaining bone mineral density and muscle mass. You have the medication degrading bone architecture while the body lacks the secondary androgens that would help rebuild it.
If DHEA is vital for bone and muscle maintenance, why is it not standard practice to replace it alongside cortisol and aldosterone? The medical community replaces the other missing hormones. Leaving out a precursor to testosterone and estrogen seems like a massive oversight, scarce as research might be.
It is a subject of ongoing debate in endocrinology. For a long time, DHEA was considered a weak androgen without major clinical significance. Recent clinical trials have shifted that perspective. a double-blind trial published in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism, studied the effects of a 50 milligram DHEA dose in patients with Addison's disease over 12 months. The researchers found that the replacement reversed ongoing loss of bone mineral density at the femoral neck and enhanced truncal lean muscle mass. The patients also reported improvements in psychological well-being and reduced fatigue.
Those sound like significant benefits for a population struggling with compounding fatigue and bone loss. There must be a catch, or else every endocrinologist would prescribe it without hesitation.
The hesitation comes from the side effect profile. In that same study, some older female patients achieved supraphysiological DHEA levels, meaning the hormone levels went higher than what is natural for their age group. This led to androgenic side effects like acne, increased apocrine, sweat secretion, and unwanted hair growth. Because DHEA converts into both testosterone and estrogen in peripheral tissues, the conversion rate varies from person to person. It is hard to standardize a dose that provides the bone and muscle benefits without tipping the patient into hormonal excess. Endocrine guidelines suggest considering a trial of DHEA for patients with primary adrenal insufficiency who experience significant fatigue despite optimized standard replacements, but it is not a blanket recommendation.
That brings us back to the lived experience of the patient. You have a person taking fixed cortisol, missing DHEA, experiencing natural age-related declines in other sex hormones, and facing an increased risk of bone fractures. The My Adrenal Life article mentions that muscle changes are not just about strength. The changes involve recovery. A person might go to the gym, do a standard workout, and find themselves unable to function the next day.
Physical activity requires a coordinated stress response. When a healthy person lifts weights, their body creates micro tears in the muscle tissue, and cortisol spikes to manage the inflammation and mobilize glucose for energy. After the workout, the cortisol levels drop back down, and growth hormones step in to repair the tissue. In a patient with adrenal insufficiency, the body does not produce that extra cortisol on demand. The patient has to either take an extra dose of medication to cover the exercise, which risks over-replacement, or try to push through on their baseline dose.
Pushing through seems to be the default cultural advice for fatigue. We are surrounded by fitness mantras telling us to ignore the pain and grind harder. Applying that mindset to a disease where the stress response is broken sounds dangerous.
It is counterproductive. An adrenal insufficiency patient pushes through a workout without adequate cortisol coverage, their body experiences a severe energy deficit. This leads to profound fatigue that feels disproportionate to the activity. It is not just feeling tired, it is a cellular energy crisis. The recovery period drags out because the body lacks the anabolic signaling from DHEA and sex hormones to repair the muscle efficiently. The patient ends up weaker rather than stronger, which is the exact opposite of the intended goal.
The traditional metrics of progress do not apply here. A healthy individual tracks progress by adding weight to the bar or running a faster mile. If those metrics lead to a crash for someone with this condition, the entire strategy for maintaining physical health has to shift. How does a person adapt to this changing landscape without giving up on their physical health altogether?
The strategy shifts from intensity to consistency. Pacing becomes the most important tool. Instead of doing a high-intensity interval workout that drains the endocrine system, a patient might focus on consistent, moderate resistance training. Weight-bearing exercise is crucial because it signals the bones to retain mineral density, which counters the effects of the glucocorticoids. The goal is to stimulate the muscle and bone without triggering a systemic stress response that the body cannot handle. Recovery becomes an active part of the progress, not just a break between workouts.
It requires a profound level of body awareness. A patient has to differentiate between standard age-related fatigue, everyday tiredness, and the specific fatigue that signals low cortisol. The My Adrenal Life piece notes that these changes feel layered and unpredictable. One day a 3-mile walk is fine, and the next day it causes a crash.
That unpredictability stems from the multiple systems changing at once. You are not just dealing with age, you are aging within a modified hormonal framework. Small variables like a minor head cold, a bad night's sleep, or an emotional stressor at work consume the available oral cortisol. When the patient goes to do their usual physical activity, the tank is empty. A healthy endocrine system would just make more cortisol to cover the gap. The adrenal insufficiency patient hits a wall. Listening to early fatigue signals and allowing adequate rest is the only way to avoid the crash.
Monitoring bone health must require the same proactive mindset. If bone loss is gradual and silent, a patient cannot wait until they feel weak to address it. We mentioned the high fracture risk earlier. What are the specific clinical recommendations for staying ahead of glucocorticoid-induced osteoporosis?
The National Institute for Health and Care Excellence guidelines recommend that people with adrenal insufficiency receive a DEXA bone density scan within 5 years of their diagnosis. If the scan shows osteopenia, which is early bone loss, or full osteoporosis, the patient and their endocrinologist need to evaluate the medication protocol. The first step is always checking the daily glucocorticoid dose. Many patients are maintained on doses higher than they need. Reducing the dose by even a few milligrams can make a massive difference in preserving bone mass over a decade.
Beyond adjusting the medication, what else moves the needle? We hear endless advice about calcium and vitamin D, but those supplements often feel like dropping a pebble into an ocean when you are fighting a potent synthetic steroid.
Calcium and vitamin D are foundational. They do not reverse osteoporosis on their own, but the body cannot rebuild bone without them. If a patient is deficient in vitamin D, their gut cannot absorb calcium from their diet, and the body will pull calcium out of the skeleton to maintain blood levels. But you are correct that supplements are not enough to counter the steroids alone. That is why the mechanical stress of weight-bearing exercise is required. If the bone density continues to drop despite those efforts, doctors look at biphosphonates or other anti-resorptive medications that stop the osteoclasts from breaking down the bone tissue.
It is a delicate balancing act. You take one medication to survive, then you have to manage the side effects of that medication with lifestyle changes, scans, and potentially more medications. The psychological burden of managing this condition while also dealing with the natural aging process must be immense. The article touches on a quiet concern underneath it all, wondering if things will just continue to get harder.
That psychological burden is a core part of the disease. Patients spend their lives trying to mimic a flawless, dynamic organ using static pills. When aging changes the rules, it feels like failing. The message the author emphasizes is that the body is not failing. It is adapting to a very difficult set of physiological constraints. The unpredictable days and the slower recovery times are not a character flaw or a lack of willpower. They are the direct result of a complex biological math problem.
Reframing the experience from failure to adaptation changes the entire perspective. It gives the patient permission to stop measuring themselves against a healthy, fully functioning endocrine system. When you understand the stacking effect of declining sex hormones and fixed cortisol, the unpredictable fatigue makes logical sense. It is no longer a mystery.
Understanding the mechanics brings a lot of peace to patients. Once you know that the long recovery times are tied to the lack of DHEA and the fixed cortisol, you stop fighting the reality of the disease. You start working within the framework. You prioritize the DEXA scans, you manage your exercise pacing, and you protect your recovery time. The uncertainty of aging never goes away, but the management strategies become clear, actionable steps. Stability is still possible.
The conversation around chronic illness and aging needs this level of nuance. We are not just talking about getting older. We are talking about navigating a lifelong condition that alters the basic foundation of human biology. We covered the history of the treatments, the mechanics of bone loss, the debate around DHEA, and the practical strategies for maintaining muscle mass.
It is a testament to the resilience of the patient community. They are charting new territory as previous generations did not have the opportunity to age with this condition.
Every patient learning to pace their workouts and advocate for bone density scans is contributing to a better understanding of how to live well with adrenal insufficiency.
We have to keep questioning the standard protocols, pushing for better research into hormone replacements like DHEA, and recognizing the daily effort required to manage this disease. The human body is remarkable in its ability to adapt, even when the internal systems are completely rewired. If you found this discussion helpful, send this episode to a friend who might benefit from a deeper understanding of how the body works.